Hi, I'm Claire Kaufmann. It's an honor to be here to open up this conference. And when they told me I only had 20 minutes to give an industry update, I thought, now what part of the industry isn't changing? So we have a lot to cover. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. Okay. So super high level, we'll start understanding that Illinois is one of the newest additions to the adult use cannabis space in the United States. That means we have 11 total adult use states, 33 with medical programs. And of course, we just heard the Safe Banking Act make it through the House, and the States Act is on its way. So for those of you that don't know, those two acts in tandem work together to protect cannabis companies and, importantly, the individuals that work for them in states where they are operating in compliance with state cannabis law from federal persecution and federal fines. So it's imperative that we put those things in place so that the industry overall can flourish. So when we look high level at the industry, we're seeing a lot of growth. This isn't news. How is the industry growing? That's where the news is. So right now, this year in 2019, we are expected to see in the United States $11 billion in cannabis sales. So that's right now going to be about 75% of the market is adult use cannabis sales, with 25% still in the medical space. So being that a majority of the growth is coming from the adult use space, it's coming from three major categories. So we have concentrates, edibles, and flower. And in some states, we're seeing concentrate revenue eclipse flower revenue, but flower is still driving a lot of the volume. It will be interesting to also see how public health concerns around vapes affect growth going forward in this space. When we look at the nuances of this industry, we see that the fastest growing subcategories are tinctures, pre-rolls, capsules, and topicals, which may not come as a surprise to you if you've been watching CBD, because those are, in fact, four of the fastest growing subcategories in the CBD space as well. So what we're really seeing is two markets that are starting to mirror each other, and we'll get into the CBD space in just a minute. When we look at global cannabis sales, so one of the things that the Brightfield Group that we specialize in doing is not just studying Canadian and the US markets, but we also do a lot of work studying global markets. So this year, in 2019, we see that Canada is accounting for about 10% of global cannabis sales, with LATAM, Latin America, and Israel accounting for about 1% each. But we're seeing substantial growth, both from the Canadian market and from Europe. So in just 2 short years, we're expecting the Canadian market to account for almost 20% of global cannabis sales, and for the European market to account for 13%. This is massive growth. It's also really hard to talk about cannabis and give a market update without talking about what's going on high level at the industry level. So what we're really seeing is what we call vertical integration. And I know that sounds so obvious to many of you, but for many of the newcomers, vertical integration is really about an integrated supply chain. So whereas cannabis companies used to focus just on cultivation, just on distribution, just on retail, now they're bringing all of those services under one roof, and we're seeing a lot of vertical integration and a lot of consolidation. So we saw Cresco Labs with their acquisition of Origin House, Harvest, which is finalizing their deal with Verano. Each of those are close to $850 million deals. And then, of course, we saw Curaleaf make the acquisition of Cura, which we all know is the maker of Select Oil, one of the largest cannabis oil manufacturers in the United States. And that was close to $1 billion. So we're seeing a lot of expansion and also consolidation. We're also seeing a lot of non-cannabis companies come into the space. So for example, we saw Cronos make some big acquisitions this year, in particular beloved brand Lord Jones, but then we saw Altria take a 44% stake in Cronos with the opportunity to buy more going forward. Same thing with Canopy. We see Canopy just acquiring stores in Bickle. Those are the makers of the vape company, the Volcano and the Crafty. And also we saw Constellation Beverages acquiring near a 40% stake in Canopy. One of the other things we're doing, and I know this will come as a total shock to a lot of you, is we're seeing a lot of cannabis companies get into mainstream hemp-derived CBD. And Tilray, which we know is founded by Privateer, just acquired a company called Manitoba Harvest. And why does this matter? So Manitoba Harvest, yes, they make CBD, but they are primarily a hemp foods company. So what we're really talking about here is not just large cannabis companies getting into the CBD space. What we're seeing is large cannabis companies beginning to secure their supply chains into chained retailers. This is about the securing of supply chain, where their customers are and where their eventual customers will be. So it's not hard to understand why a lot of cannabis companies are looking to get into CBD. So besides the fact that they can expand their product portfolio in the short term, we see tremendous growth in this space. So by 2023, we're going to see $23 billion in sales in the CBD space, according to our research at the Brightfield Group. How is this possible? Well, number one, we just completed a really compelling cultivation study in which we, in fact, found, yes, in the United States, we do have enough hemp being cultivated right now in order to meet this demand. In addition, we also have a lot of traditional CPG companies that are just one meeting away from having CBD in products that they're already making and that already have a loyal following. So when we see the rapid expansion of this space, it's not just a category. It's really as much as it is an ingredient as well. Now, like I said before, one of the most important things going on in CBD is the expansion into chained retailers. Last year, chained retailers made up less than 4% of CBD sales. This year, in just the first 2 quarters of 2019, we see CBD sales at chained retailers eclipsing more than 50% of total sales. So what we're really seeing here when cannabis companies go into CBD, I want to make sure this is clear. This is about securing distribution networks so that they can begin to meet their customers in a new way and prepare eventually down the road, I think, for legalization and also just in order to expand their portfolio. So this is where I get to geek out. So I love studying the size of the market, and I love studying how it's growing. What really interests me in this space is consumers. What is going on? Who is buying these products? How has that changed over time? What do they want from them? How much are they willing to spend? And what's their general attitude? So at the Brightfield Group, one of the things that we do is once a quarter, we send out a survey to 5,000 confirmed cannabis users. We also do the same thing with CBD. But what we do is when we bring in that data, we're able to aggregate it and to create a really compelling picture of the American use of cannabis in their daily lives. And 85% of people who take our survey, when they do so, opt in to share their social media with us. So what we can do is we can run their Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter feeds all through a natural language processing algorithm that can tell us about the psychological makeup of cannabis consumers. So now we're able to get a picture of not just what they're doing when they're consuming cannabis, but what their lives are like when they're not, with the entire purpose of developing messages that truly resonate with consumers. We have the same thing also with CBD. And actually, cannabis and CBD consumers behave quite differently. And I'm not talking about CBD today, but if you're interested, let me know and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so when we aggregate all 5,000 of these surveys, we start to see the emergence of what we call personas. Personas are what you might call consumer segments, but at Brightfield we call them personas. So when we look super high level at cannabis consumers, here's what we're seeing. They're equally likely to be male and female. They're better educated, 17% identify as LGBTQ. They skew a bit younger. And this statistic is what I want to really call your attention to. 46% are consuming 5 times a week or more. And close to 70% are consuming cannabis at least weekly. So we're talking about a customer that is a very loyal and habit-forming customer. It is imperative. They're price sensitive though. So cannabis consumers are far more price sensitive than mainstream hemp-derived CBD consumers are. And we also see that they're not particularly brand loyal yet. We don't know that that's necessarily true, or whether we aren't seeing brands that resonate yet, or the proliferation of those brands enough in market. One of the things that's really interesting about cannabis consumers, if we study their psychology, and I bet you there's a lot of people like you guys in here. So we discover that they like to come across as really chill and really laid back, but on the inside, they are a mess. So they are stressed out, they are anxious, they are negative, and it's, if you look at the news, it's like not hard to tell, like why. And it's probably why they were consuming cannabis in the first place. But understanding that psychological dimension, the duality between coming across a certain way, the laid-back persona versus the underlying nerve, is really important when you're developing messages that really resonate with consumers. And when we look at the kinds of social media they follow and the kinds of things they're into, I think it's fun. So we can study, they actually love to read about science. And in particular, they're totally into NASA and space. And they love The Simpsons and Futurama. So raise your hand if you're okay. Anyways, I also wanted to talk about one of the other demographic groups that everybody's talking about, and that's women. So what makes female cannabis consumers behave differently and act differently than male cannabis consumers do? So when we look at women overall in our research, we find that 50% of them have children in the home. 50%. And 63% are under 40. And again, we see this staggering statistic that close to 50% are consuming 5 times a week or more. They're taking it for anxiety. That's the primary reason that women consume cannabis, and it's actually the primary reason that consumers under the age of 30 consume cannabis. We also see that they value taste and price equally, so they're less price sensitive than male consumers are in general. We also see that they're extroverted and actually pretty happy campers. If we look at general cannabis consumers, they're pretty down, but we look at women, they're a little bit more optimistic. They're very community focused. So any brand that has a social purpose or social message is going to resonate really strongly with female consumers today. They love flower and baked goods equally. Actually, they like those two categories almost more than vapes. And what's really interesting is 75% spend less than $50 a product, but they buy multiple products a month. So when I was working as the marketing director for a big vertically integrated cannabis company up in Oregon, we had 15 stores. So we, anecdotally, this is my research, not Brightfield's, I should say. So we conducted a study to understand our male and female consumers across our 15 stores. And what we discovered was really interesting. So male consumers, they came in far more often, but they spent way less. But when women came in, they spent more, even though they didn't come in as often. So we decided to focus our marketing efforts on getting women to come in the store more frequently because they had higher checkout when they left. So it's something to consider if you're moving forward about marketing to women and understanding that they're buying multiple products a month. We don't know why yet. We don't know if they're buying them just for themselves or they're buying for others and their family. And then in terms of things they love Jennifer Hudson. They're really into that. The Food Network, Ellen DeGeneres, and Bath & Body Works. So on the Brightfield portal, you can actually see the very hashtags and very social things they're into. So if you're putting together a marketing plan and you want to know where to advertise, because there's so few places you can actually know where your customers are, which is like radical. Okay. The last one I wanted to talk about was seniors. Now, seniors are a big group. So I want you to understand that at Brightfield, we segment seniors into multiple categories. Okay. So there's what we call like old stoners and hippies, and those are cannabis consumers that have been consuming cannabis the whole time. They never stopped. We also have newbies. Those are cannabis consumers that are new to cannabis. What I'm going to talk about today are what we call boomerangs. Boomerang consumers are consumers that consumed cannabis when they were younger and then stopped, and now they're coming back to it. So why are they coming back to it? What do they want from these products? Well, boomerang consumers primarily consume cannabis to treat chronic pain, not for anxiety. And in general, they're considered to be very optimistic. And what I think is most notable about these consumers is 90% are consuming 10 milligrams or less per dose. 90%. So and this is the customer that's coming back to cannabis. This is not a new customer. So we're really seeing the integration of cannabis into their life as a pain management tool. And I'm pretty convinced that we are going to see the binary, and it is very much a binary, between the rec and medical start to blur, because that's really a designation at a register. That's not really a designation for a use cause. So I think over time we'll start to see that disintegrate going forward. And I smiled a big smile when I saw the things that they were into. Van Morrison, Leonard Skinner, Consumer Reports magazine, and Mitt Romney. So one of the things that I wanted to leave you with is, there really isn't a space in the cannabis world that isn't changing. We have high-level shifts going on at the legislative level. We have new states coming on board. We have growth in the global markets. We have growth across different categories. We have consolidation. We have vertical integration. We have consumer demographics shifting and changing. So I found this quote. I thought it was really appropriate. The great danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence. It is to act with yesterday's logic. So at the Brightfield Group, we specialize in making sure that our cannabis and CBD, both market and consumer data, is up to date, and that we can help you really understand what your consumers actually want from your products. So thank you so much, and have a great show, you guys. Thank you so much.